If I were to frame this up, I'd say this is a casual discussion with great points of view on a very fast and emerging market category within cybersecurity, which is security data pipelines. I think if I were to summarize like the takeaways or what we're hoping people get out of this is not really so much about any product in particular or any solution in particular. It's about the problem space and how new and emerging solutions are helping security teams modernize their SOC. And so that that could overlap with what we do at Realm, but more importantly, it's just trying to share best practices and things that everyone around the table has learned. And so without any further ado, would love to jump into the conversation. I don't want to steal anyone's thunder, but Axa, I know you all have been working hard on a updated market guide. So would get your thoughts and maybe share a bit about the market guide that's going to be coming out later this year.
Sure. Actually, this week. And this is the first sneak peek that our listeners get on the upcoming report. In April, we published our first report recognizing security data pipeline platforms, recognizing the value they bring to SIEM efficiency, ingestion controls, cost controls, and also just detection experience, improving detections in your analytic platforms at storage levels, and how they sit between data sources and data destinations to improve that quality of data flowing in. In this version of our security data pipelines report, we're going to dive deeper into some of the top leading vendors that we see in this category in terms of both established players who have in-depth capabilities, but also some really promising newcomers who have been very impressive with the depth of their capabilities, how they've integrated AI into it. So we're going to dive deeper into what are key capabilities to expect from these platforms, how vendors have been innovating, and what's resonating with the security leaders as well. And we've spent a lot of time interviewing security leaders. We've spent a lot of time looking through market and the categories of vendors, what they're doing in innovation to come up with this list that we have. So really excited, and I hope you will read it. It's available again without any gating.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, the perspective that you all have, given you talk to a lot of the leading vendors, but also the customers, I think that's the most powerful portion, and that's a good segue to a question I have for you, Aaron. I know you all took time to evaluate the security data pipeline space. Instead of getting into what the solutions provide, just talk a bit about why you felt your organization would benefit from a security data pipeline.
Yeah, and there are a few reasons for that, right? One is a potential cost reduction for large monolithic, SIM solutions. We're piping in a bunch of irrelevant data, and is there a way to effectively winnow that down? So we're looking at very relevant data, and we're doing so in an intelligent way. There's also cost for my staff time, right? There's a lot of work that goes into the data hygiene for winnowing that data down. If there's a more automated way to do that, obviously we'd want to look at that. We're also looking internally at building out a data lake, right? And doing more intelligent analytics around the data. Our current models of, again, ingesting everything into one of these monolithic SIM systems don't really lend themselves very well to also being able to create one of these data lakes. So a lot of duplicative work efforts there. So as we look at sort of that data fabric, data pipeline, we're really looking at how do we improve efficiencies across the board? How do we achieve all of our goals? And how do we do that in a relatively seamless way? And so that's a lot of the motivating factors that caused us to look at it. And it's exciting that, we're finally at a place where we're able to do something like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's huge. I would give yourself and your team a lot of credit. You're very forward thinking in more of a practical way as opposed to chasing the new shiny object. You find the things that are
Thank
super
you.
relevant, yeah, to advance your program. And I think one of the questions that I have for you, X, is it really cost reduction that's driving the adoption? What else are you seeing? What else are you hearing from customers as far as reasons to look at this market?
I mean, Pete, as unshiny as cost reduction may sound, and as redundant as the marketing trends are on cost reduction, it really is important. I mean, security budgets aren't inflating, but the threat landscape is, and exponentially so, right? And to keep up with these, you need good ingestion, you need good quality data. But if you're just ingesting everything, you're kind of lost and drowned in alert fatigue, noisiness, and it affects everything. It affects cost as one factor, yes, but it also affects other things. Like it affects your effort that you need to sift through this noise. It also affects your detection experience. Are you actually collecting logs that are important for your detection policies? Or maybe you're collecting things that are never going to trigger your detections, but you're still paying for it, right? So these are the factors that security practitioners have been saying are why this category of security data pipeline platforms is really been helpful to them, because initially it was like a monolithic architecture. You take all your logs, your VPC flow logs, firewall logs, etc. You put them in your SIEMs, analytic platforms, whether they're XDRs or even like say data lakes, storages. Then you apply analytics on top of it. But at this time, you have duplicate entries, you have empty fields, you have a lot of just noise, maybe accept messages and event fields that are never going to be important for your detections, but they're all there. So your queries are so long in getting whatever is good for you. And so all of this again goes back to why you need this broker in between to improve cost, to improve quality, and to really improve your work overall for your SecOps team.
Yeah, that's really well put. It's obviously we're super close to the problem because this is what we do. So Realm offers a security data pipeline, and it's so often that I get the question is like, so who is Realm and what do you do or why'd you start the company? And it's funny, I think my answer changes every time, but it gets a little bit more close to reality. I think one of the things. So I've been this is my sixth cybersecurity startup. I've been on the vendor side for over 15 years. And when you look backward at history, it's very linear. But when you're in the moment, it doesn't always make sense. And so the reason I say that is throughout my career, maybe going back 7, 8 years ago, I started to see the proliferation of security data engineering as a new capability that a lot of security teams were investing in. And at the time, it was just it was interesting. It was a data
Yeah.
point. It didn't mean a lot. But
Hmm.
you look backward and you look at history and it's very linear, you start to realize that the organizations that had the resources to set up security data engineering teams did so for a very, kind of specific reason,
Yeah.
which is the data they ingest um, wasn't meant to be used entirely. It was given the kind of more is more and just give the customer everything they need and then let them decide what they need. And I'm curious, Axel, like how do you think about what types of organizations should be considering security data pipelines? Do you see it as a broad market need? Do you see it as primarily for upmarket? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think especially it doesn't matter on the size of the company. And this is what we've learned from our practitioners. It's not that you could be a small company, but maybe you're a retail shop and you have a lot of data flowing through. So you're creating a lot of data per terabytes per day, whatever that may be, right? Or you could be a large enterprise with the same amount of data flowing in. So for practitioners to evaluate is what is your ingestion flow look like? And how much your storage is inflated. And do you have good visibility into the quality of the data you're ingesting? So, yes, sometimes you need data for compliance. Great, but you don't need that in hot storage or analytic platforms. You need it in your cold storage. But how will you route if you don't have visibility and understanding of what is good, what is required for detections versus what can be stored for compliance? So, I think that's where security data pipeline platforms like Rogue and others provide that flexibility and that visibility of quality. So now, even if you think that, hey, I don't want to filter anything, I want to save my raw logs, etc., at least you know how to parse it, how to split it between your different tiers at the destination, regardless of the size of company. So think about size of data versus size of company when it comes to evaluating why you need a security data pipeline platform.
Yeah, and so it's really like moving yourself toward that needs-based data model. So the context, the destination has the context of the purpose.
Mhm.
That's well put. Um, and Aaron, you very recently and your team very recently looked into the market. I'm curious, what were some of the requirements that you all had in a solution?
Yeah, we wanted very clear visibility, right? We wanted to understand, as Exa just mentioned, what our data is, what it looks like. We also wanted data normalization, right? And we wanted data normalization that was intelligent. Again, so I'm reducing the effort that my team is putting into manually curating this data so that, we're then able to say, hey, we're more intelligently using this data. Um, and it's more hands off, right? So the more we're able to rely on a trustworthy solution, we'd love to be able to look for that. We're also looking for, ease of use at configuration, right? Can we stand it up easily? Can we point it at a data set, and then can we route that data set very easily to where we need it to go, whether it be a SIEM, whether it be a data lake, whether it be some other source that we, destination that we want to send the data to, right? And so those were a lot of the primary drivers we were looking at, again, to sort of reduce the complexity and overhead with our data, and to better drive those efficiencies from, more intelligent data utilization.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things, and I'm curious if this is the same for you all, one of the things that we often have a conversation about is, hey, saving budget and cost is great. Like that's a worthwhile activity. But if it risks creating blind spots or removing observables within the logs that drive detections, it's not worth it, right? Because at the end of the day, if
Like,
you blind detections, like what's the benefit of saving costs? Because you're blinding your organization. So I'm curious, was that a conversation that you all had internally?
Yeah, it absolutely was. I mean, I think we wanted a solution that would be effective, that would be trustworthy, and that wouldn't increase our risk posture because, I mean, to your point, if we're not alerting on absolutely critical things that are happening in our environment, right? A threat actors in our environment, and we're missing the telemetry that's going to tell us that, I mean, that's millions of dollars, right? That's regulatory, reputational risk. And obviously we want to avoid that. So any solution that's going to increase that risk is unacceptable for us, right? So we wanted something where, we were getting relevant data, we were getting rid of irrelevant data, and we were able to understand what is relevant versus irrelevant, right? So it's not completely black boxed for us.
Yeah, the potential need for the data you're filtering is a huge
Yeah.
discussion. And I think if you look at this market, it's not the concept of this is not new. Like this has been around for a while,
yeah,
and so it's a little bit of a V2 of the ETL market. And I think the thing that we thought about is, hey, look, it's great to go after a bigger market, meaning you could go after security and infrastructure, because as an entrepreneur, like that, the size of the market definitely matters. But I think the thing for us is we prioritized our ability to deliver a solution that actually solves the problem. And the more and more we looked at the multitude of SIM vendors and the need to understand all the detections that are driven for each and every single SIM, it became obvious for us that you needed to be security specific. You can't be a
yeah.
generalist pipeline to deliver these outcomes. Aksa, what do you think about like the dedicated security aspect of a pipeline product?
Yeah, and actually I was just listening to both of you because I think you kind of nailed it. This is why security data pipelines are their own category. This is why, even as an analyst, we don't want to combine them with an ETL or telemetry platforms that are meant to do that, like routing efficiency and all of that. But what really differentiates security data pipeline platforms and why we have this dedicated report on just this category is the security focus. At the end of the day, the difference is you want to have a good SecOps posture. You want to have better detections at the SIM platform. And to get there, you need a platform that, first of all, understands what data will trigger those detections. If you're just a dropping platform, like, oh, this is not from a security scanner, let me drop it. Well, there are cloud audit trails that are important for security and for triggering some detections. So this platform that's in between needs to understand how those detections work at your destination, and then apply filtering logic that will be useful. And so this conversation that we just had with Aaron mentioning, like, is it just about reduction? I mean, if there's cost savings, why don't we just not onboard everything? before that was another conversation. Like maybe we're onboarding noisy logs. Let's just turn this integration off until we figure out the quality. But we can't take those chances anymore, right? So that's why these platforms and their focus on security and understanding of the SIEM and analytic platforms is why they're their own category and why they're so important to the overall architecture, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I could just take one snippet of you saying security data pipeline should be its own category, I think that's the one snippet I would take because it's emerging, right? And people often bundle it into one category. We have a similar perspective. Um, one of the things I think I have a lot of empathy for when talking to customers is the frequency at which AI is used from both the marketing positioning perspective, but also just as far as not being super specific on how AI is used. What do you what's the variability, Aqsa, that you're seeing in products and the level at which they're using AI versus not using AI?
I think sometimes because of marketing, AI becomes a buzzword more than a strength or capability. So the very easiest thing is, hey, you can look through your data because we have AI. Great. That's like a basic functionality that AI can be used in, but that's not just AI. AI is not just a chatbot that you can interact with and understand your data. I mean, that reminds me of like the little Clipper days that we had before.
I think it was Clippy.
Clippy,
Yeah.
yay, there you go. I think I'm revealing my age by even mentioning that. But the idea is AI should be a strength of the platform. That means how you're even evaluating detections, how you're understanding your data quality, and all of that. And even if it's not like AI feature, here's a chatbot that will do it, just have it in the platform and do or improve the quality naturally. Whether you call it a co-pilot, whether you call it an assistant, an agent, or just even if you have an internal like machine learning and AI capabilities that reinforce your pipelines, schema drift detections, normalizations, parsers, understanding, automating, creating of parsers, and things like that. I think those are the use cases where AI as a tool can strengthen the platform. And some of the other ways we're seeing is, I think you mentioned error normalization, so that's a big one. And how do you understand if there's a schema drift or not? How do you understand the integrations themselves? So instead of being like a generic integrator or a connector that kind of takes in all raw logs, destinate source specific integrations that can understand the source really well and the types and of the versions of that sources. And then using AI in like health monitoring. Health monitoring is a big thing as well. If your data sources are suddenly silent, that's not always a good thing. So understanding the status of your integration health, understanding any abnormalities there, anomalies there, those are different ways where AI as a tool can help strengthen the capabilities of the platform itself.
And to your point, it's like this kind of summary of what you mentioned. There's so many areas where AI could be used. And I think there's, giving customers the ability to use AI within your product that we deliver. But I think the bigger thing that we've seen is finding ways to incorporate AI into the architecture. And so what you actually do is you're taking the burden of configuration off of the customer. And it's not necessarily like a chatbot or dare we say Clippy, but it's the ability to bring a solution to market where the customer doesn't need professional services, and they don't need to be supremely technical to get value out of the solution. And so I thought that was
And
well put.
and just to add to that, Peter, I think because this market is maturing, we see so much growing investment in this market. Congratulations on the Series A to you too, but also the acquisitions and everything going on. There's a lot of money being invested in this market. So how will the vendors differentiate? It's going to come down to experience. It's going to come down to deployment flexibility, experience, integration breadths, and all of that as differentiators as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's very excited about AI. And I think we've kind of moved from this like theoretical, exciting thing to people really understanding this is going to change my life. And everyone's looking for how is it going to change my life?
Yeah.
So I think while we are kind of like numb to AI because it's overused, I think there also is like a counterforce, which is I'm very interested to find real applications that can give me that 10x
Yeah.
leverage And so, Aaron, what are your thoughts on that? I know you guys are thinking about some interesting things around agents and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I like thoughtful implementations of AI, right? I mean, I think it's tiresome when someone just sort of slaps AI onto an existing
Yeah.
product and says, hey, now we're AI enabled, right? Because I don't think that's particularly effective. I don't think it's saving anybody really any time. It's not adding efficiency. It's not adding functionality, really. So really what we're looking for with artificial intelligence, whether it's something we're developing internally or we're purchasing, is there a thoughtful implementation of artificial intelligence that really is sort of that force multiplier, right? And you hear that a lot in the AI conversation, but it's really making more effective the work being done sort of on the back end, so that my staff are able to focus on some of the more sophisticated, more complex things that they
Yeah,
need to do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Go ahead, Alex. Were you gonna say something?
Oh no, I was just agreeing 100%. That's the voice of practitioner overall, over throughout the board.
Yeah, it's I talk to customers every week, and I think the one topic that's kind of in front of everybody is the use of agents for tier one SOC use cases, and it's a very exciting market. It's heavily competitive, and I think one of the things that we're realizing is it's all driven by data. And so, these agents are only good as the data that they're fed.
Yeah.
And they're only able to offer the capabilities that they bring to market, as long as they can get the data. And so reliability and governance around the agents, I could see becoming increasingly part of the conversation. I'm not sure, Aqsa, like how do you see agents and pipelines like meeting? And I know you don't have like a crystal ball, and like this might be like a semi-formed thought, but I'm curious what you think about pipelines and agents.
Yeah, I think right now AI is in a place where people are more accepting of it, like the users, end users. Maybe like when it first came, like a couple years ago, there was like, oh my gosh, I don't know, you're gonna take my data, you're gonna do something with it, I'm not gonna share. But now people understand there's guardrails, there's good governance, you're not gonna share training models with other customers' data, hopefully not. But that's kind of like becoming a foundation, which is helping security leaders trust the use of AI more and more within these security platforms. And as a result of that, I I do see a future of like agentic pipeline platforms or AI agents helping with the level one triaging, removing the noisy alerts or even false positives, reducing more of that. In fact, we did a report on AI SOC and the different levels that AI agents can help with the SOC operations. So I don't think it's too far-fetched to think that agentic AI pipelines will is a dream. I think it's more near term than a very long-term vision.
I've heard the same thing. I think the number one thing that's happening, which is going to impact the agentic use case, is the decoupling of storage from detection.
Yes.
And we've kind of historically operated in this architecture where the SIM has both storage as well as where detection is served. And I think there's so many interesting opportunities and new technologies that are decoupling the storage from detection. Um, so it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I do have like a shameless plug of a question that I would like to ask, and so I apologize in advance. But Aaron, your team obviously evaluated the market and ended up choosing Realm. Would you be open to sharing kind of what capabilities about Realm made that the right decision?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And originally we were looking at it, I think from sort of a more crass cost savings, right? We want to be able to reduce our costs with our SIM, both the compute costs and the storage costs. But what we realized through the evaluation, what we've realized since, implementing Realm in our environment is, hey, we're able to have more intelligent utilization of data, right? We have a better understanding of what data is going where, why we need the data, why it's relevant, and I think it's driving more sophisticated conversations around, okay, here's how we're going to craft detections. Here's how we're going to craft some of our response playbooks as a result of that, right? And the conversation about agentic AI and the SOC, I mean, I constantly talking about that with my deputy. He wants to tear the whole thing down and, start anew where we have a data lake and, agents everywhere. And like, I think it's absolutely wonderful. And I think it's the future of where we're going. I don't think we're quite there yet necessarily, but I'm excited to see the developments in the space. And a product like Realm enables us to have those conversations as opposed to saying, hey, we're locked into sort of this clunky monolithic SIEM system that isn't going to support that very well. And oh my gosh, how are we going to implement all of this? Right. So I think it creates the overhead for us to be able to have a lot more flexibility on what we do with our data, how we're doing it with our data, and visibility into that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So it's like the perspective of cost savings, like that, just kind of like rudimentary need driving the interest, was definitely obviously the kind of like the high level objective. But I think one of the things that's different about every single security team is depending what SIM they use, cost savings take shape in different form, right? And
Right.
so there's pure ingest, but there's also compute. And so one of the things I think we're increasingly talking about is shifting detections left. And so the ability for, as the data is being processed in the pipeline, to use that as an opportunity to drive enhancements, enrichments, and detections, which then kind of goes into what you were saying, which leads to more kind of creative conversations on how you're crafting detections and how your security team is making best use of the data. Is that on point with kind of like what you think and how you see the use of pipelines, or am I off base at all?
Yeah, no, and I'm a big fan of shifting left wherever possible, right? Wherever we're able to bring something closer to the source, I think we have more accurate decision making. I think we have better use of data. And, quite frankly, I think we're empowering whomever, is able to make those detections to do it quicker, better, faster, et cetera, right? So, absolutely part of the conversation. We're even talking to our operations teams internally about, hey, we're collecting all of this really great data. How are we going to utilize it across the board, not only for security uses, even though we have that sort of security focus and lens on it, where are we going to be able to drive better efficiencies as a result of the telemetry we're collecting and some of the automation we're able to drive as a result of that?
You bring up a great point, which is it's not only the security team that needs the SIM. And one of the conversations we've actually had with yourself and your organization is how do you make sure in the course of filtering and reducing cost in the SIM, you're not concurrently disabling the IT and infrastructure team to do diagnostics, performance monitoring. And so again, another shameless plug, like one of the things I think we realized based on the guidance that you were able to give us is how can we build an archive solution that enables self-service? And that could be self-service for both incident response and compliance, but also infrastructure and IT. And I think just to be brutally honest with you, I personally was ignorant to that need, and so that kind of speaks to the benefit of working hand in hand with customers to build the best potential solution to the problem that we may or may not fully understand. So um,
Absolutely.
appreciate the chance to learn with you.
Uh,
Um, so Aaron, I've been peppering you a little bit with questions. So I'm gonna take a moment, and I do have a question for Axa. Axa, what are you seeing as far as like the key leading requirements for the security teams that are embarking on pipeline projects?
Uh, for security teams or from the capabilities of the pipelines?
Yeah, for security teams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things I really love that you said, the shift left detections. I launched it a couple months ago, so it's very dear to me, and I completely agree on that. That even if you don't do the entire SOC operations within a pipelines platform, the data layer, and we talked about how it's divided, it's no longer a monolithic architecture, the detections separate from the storage and all. The data layer is kind of becoming the control plane, you know? So the more enrichment you bring, whether it's threat enrichment, geo-IP context, business context, the more you enrich it in stream at the pipeline layer, then you can do whatever you want with it. Whether you want to save it, whether you want to send it to SOC opera, whether you want to send it to like actual remediations, whatever you want to do from it, right? So I think at the heart of a full SOC architecture, there's this control plane of data layer, and that's where pipelines really bring value. They bring the value not just in terms of reduction. So we already know the data reduction techniques, which are filtering, event level, field level, deduplication, aggregation, and all of that, and compression, schema compressions and all. But there's also additional features like enrichments, whether it's GIP, location, business context, or even threat intel context with threat intel provider feeds. And then there is the whole threat detection piece, so IOCs, whether you are going to bring that closer to the source, at least to give that context earlier, and then you can have your SOAR platforms or whatever to handle that data. But again, bringing the context earlier. And then there's capabilities on just the maintaining the quality of data itself. So whenever there are changes, whether it's integration changes at the data source, whether it's health monitoring, whether it's schema drifts, I think those are also additional capabilities that security leaders should take into account. While the entry is data reduction and cost optimization, I see security data pipelines as bringing much like beyond cost reduction value to the organization and enterprise. And that's what we're hoping with this report to educate, is that it's not just a router. It's not just an ETL, it's not just compressor or just for flexible routing. There is so much more that security data pipelines bring to make your SIEMs efficient, to make your storage and data lakes and everything else that's part of your SOC architecture better because of controlling that data plane.
Yeah. Well, and the thing to go back to something you said a few sentences ago, the being able to do detection and enrichments in the pipeline, not only is it more effective by not needing compute at the storage level, but it also reduces the mean time to detection and
Yeah.
remediation. And like the yeah, is that where you're what you're
Yeah,
seeing?
because what happens when you store in the SIM platforms is you're doing post-index searches. So first the data gets indexed and then you do the searches. So there is a delay in even the query responses that you get at the analytic platforms versus when you're doing on streaming data, you're kind of cutting all that cost away. And you are doing you're streaming through the detections while they're being routed. So you cut the post-index taxes, you cut that storage layer, you cut that understanding and the long query responses and delays. And so you're effectively reducing mean time to detect and hopefully mean time to remediate, which is the goal. But if you see, like, I think it was CrowdStrike's report on threat landscape, they said the breakout time is 43 minutes or something, right? So that means less than an hour. You have less than an hour to detect and contain an adversary as it happens. So I think that's where this concept makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and this kind of goes back to overusing AI, but with, Gen AI being in the toolbox for adversaries, the ability to create new variants of, malware or any attack types, puts more pressure on mean time to detection just because the frequency at which these things can be launched requires the defenders to be able to move faster. So,
And
more,
I think e even the existing attacks can be scaled exponentially with AI, even if they're not new tactics. So it's faster, like phishing and everything, or harnessing information about an individual from all of their social media platforms. It would take you longer time to do that before, but now it's easier. And so that's also why I think you need that faster detection.
Mhm. Yeah, that we need to make sure our defenders have the same advantages as the adversary, if not more. Um, Aaron, it looked like you might have wanted to say something. Anything to
No,
add
I was
there?
just going to say, to that point, right? And, it's timely the report that Anthropic posted last week, right, about sort of Chinese state actors leveraging Anthropic as a makeshift agentic AI, right? And being able to find attack pathways at speed and, en masse, right? So, I mean, it's incredible just the volume of work that was able to be done, you know.
Mhm.
They absolutely need to empower security teams to be able to defend against that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that was like the number one headline for the past week or so is what what happened with Anthropic for good reason too. Um, well, I think we're getting towards the end of it. I've had the privilege of being the one that gets to ask the questions, and so I wanted to turn it over, Axa or Aaron. Any questions you'd like to ask me, or any other kind of discussion points that would be worth having?
For sure. So, Pete, you're someone building this, we're analyzing it and we're writing about it and using it, but as a builder, what is your vision for the platform? I mean, of course, there's a lot of features and capabilities we discussed for security data pipelines. What's your vision of the space and what you are building and where you see the most use cases beyond like the traditional use cases?
Yeah, I think as with any market, there's a lot of time that needs to be spent on like the table stakes hygiene capabilities, and it's really kind of like attractive to move toward cutting edge and new shiny and talk about things that the market may not be ready for. So I
Yeah.
think that the candid, honest answer is I think security teams really need help in this moment, getting their ingestion down, shaping the data, and moving detections left. And so I see that being our focus for the near term. But what I would say is all the capabilities that we put into our product from day one around understanding the log context. And what we really do at the simplest level is called inference mapping. And so what we've been able to do for any vendor, any data source that we ingest, we've developed a common understanding of the inferences for the fields. And so that the basis, that foundation of our entire product really opens up the opportunities in the future. And just to get into like a little bit of the Star Trek and like where do we think this market's going? I think I think we see a world where every single security team has a solution at the data layer, where table stakes filtering is already in place. The filtering has all the context of their SIM, what detections they're using, or what types of threat hunting capabilities they have to ensure that, like what you said earlier, when you're prescribing filtering rules, there's no chance that anything is filtered that's needed for detection or incident response. And so that's something we do today. But I think more interesting is down the road when you start to look at the agentic solutions that can do both tier one SOC analyst work as well as threat hunting, the ability to deliver normalized, reliable data with guardrails and governance for agents to eventually potentially start to take over the MDR market and dare I say the SIM market. I think the SIM market has gotten a lot of stones.
Oh,
I know. The SIM market has had a lot of stones thrown at it, and I think it's unjust. And I think there's always going to be a place where detection lives within something like a SIM. But I do think it'll be very interesting to watch where some of these market-leading agentic players go. So that's my builder's perspective. Honestly, I think a lot of it is just staying focused on what teams need now and
yeah.
uh, staying aware of where the market's going.
That's fun. I look forward to seeing how you execute on that bold vision.
Did you see me back away a little bit? I was like, oh,
Oh, it's
artificial.
live. It's done.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I mean,
No,
I
no,
think
I agree. I mean, I'm not gonna say Seam is dead or is gonna die anytime soon. Let it be recorded that I haven't said that. But, however, SDPs are being ambitious, and I call this in my report SDP Plus, which is yes, your core pipeline capabilities, but they're also introducing in-house data lakes. They're also introducing querying. They're also introducing detections and analytics. I don't think there's a replacement, but they're kind of like grabbing adjacent budgets and adjacent technologies and converging into this SDP plus kind of a vision and execution too.
hmm Yeah, and just to be thoroughly clear, there's no perspective, which is the sim is dead. I see the same thing you're seeing, which is just like different architectures that drive similar outcomes. But actually that was your question for me. I appreciate the question, Aaron. Anything to speak about or any questions you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think high level, again, I appreciate being here. I appreciate having the conversation. We've had conversations at length about sort of the return on investment for, the solution realm at Mainline Health. Other customers presumably are having similar conversations. Where do you see that ROI, really hitting home?
Yeah, when we first embarked on this, I think the message was like reduce costs, save money, and I think what it's really transformed into is being able to ingest more data sources within the same limit of ingestion. So said a different way, if you can get rid of 80% of the firewalls that you're currently storing in the SIM, which gives you room to include VPC flow logs or other kind of noisy data sources which you traditionally couldn't ingest because it was too verbose. We see that as the allocation of cost savings, and so what I've typically seen is 60 to 80% of endpoint network and firewall logs can be filtered. And what that does is it opens up a bunch of capacity to monitor other data sources, which frequently wasn't tenable. And so that's one thing I'd say. I'd say the other part of this is being able to help from a compliance perspective on storage, and checking that compliance box to make sure you have the data, but additionally making it usable. So it's not just this kind of like landing zone where you dump all your data and then, inevitably you hope you never need it, but when you need it, you're like, oh, now we got to figure out how to get what we need. I think that's the other thing that we're seeing, which is just like a basic kind of like archive compliance that is usable, is a big point of benefit. Um, Axa, anything to add? I know you're talking to just as many customers as I am.
No, I think you nailed it. You're talking to security leaders as you're building, and I'm sure, Aaron, you're talking to your peers as you're building your security programs. So we're all in alignment that this data problem is not a new problem. Yes, it always existed. However, the threat landscape is now evolved much more, and the data volume creation is also exponentially increasing. And the liabilities, might I mention the SECs and all their policies and all on CISOs and security leaders is also much more tighter with the compliance requirements. That's what's driving the importance and emergence of platforms like security data pipelines like Realm, where by becoming that friend to the data layer, you're enabling a lot of other layers in the SOC architecture, in the entire SOC architecture, because you're kind of like sitting at the heart of all of this quality, routing, detection, enrichment, normalization. And so it's very natural to also think that the adjacent capabilities can slowly be implemented within. But at this point, even becoming that data plane, that control plane of data, is, I think, the most important factor to take into consideration.
And to double tap on that point, it's what you said is really smart. There's plenty of different audiences that have different needs for data, and it's all being collected once. And so the ability to adjust the data, scale the data, right size it, depending who it's getting delivered to. I think you just summed that up pretty well. I'm gonna have to write that down and reuse that. So, um, well, cool. I mean, so for everyone who's joined and is listening, thank you so much for making time, and I hope the discussion was helpful. And Axa and Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today, and look forward to talking to you guys again soon.
Thank you, Pete.